Hello guys, and welcome to this edition of First Take Tuesday on Elite Sports Network. So today I'm going to be going through 3 questions on college football for the upcoming week and for the BCS picture in general. First 3 questions I've gotten in responses from email, Twitter, or wherever. And so here we are. First question is the BCS nightmare scenario. What is the problem with the BCS right now, and what is the worst case scenario that can happen for the BCS? And obviously we pretty much all can figure it out at this point, because first we have three we have multiple undefeated teams, and that's a problem because obviously the first thing you come up with is keeping an undefeated team out of the national championship. And obviously, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is your BCS standings. Obviously 5 is Stanford, and so on. Baylor is also undefeated. Let me write them in real quick. And so, here's your BCS picture at this point, top 6 teams in the country. And, we have 5 undefeated teams right here. And obviously, that's the first thing, is we can't have 5 undefeated teams. So the nightmare scenario is, providing that all these teams win out, who goes to the BCS National Championship? Who deserves to go to the BCS National Championship? And I think that's something very hard. Obviously, there's one of them. Alabama, they win out, they're going to the BCS National Championship. They're the ones in the SEC, they're the ones with the toughest strength of schedule, they're the ones who are going to be in the National Championship. Who takes on the Crimson Tide in the championship, though? That is the question. First, let's break this down by conference. Obviously, we've got Oregon out of the Pac, FSU out of the ACC, Baylor out of the Big 12, Ohio State out from the Big 10. Obviously, sorry about my handwriting. Stanford, we can write in the Pac, though. At this point, I don't see them going to the national championship, because we're going to go into the assumption that every one of these teams wins out. If they all go undefeated, who plays Alabama in the national championship? And I think that is going to be a very tough question to answer, because what we need, and this is why the BCS is such a nightmare, is these teams have to go head-to-head. And I think that's why, the college football playoff is such a good, addition to college football. Next year, the 4 teams playing in a semifinals championship format, because obviously, here it is right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, only one of these teams gets left out, one of these undefeated teams, whereas in this scenario, 3 of the 5 undefeated teams get left out. If we could just, I've heard this a lot talking with other people, if we could just start the 4-team playoff 1 year early, it would be perfect, because obviously, if we had a bracket right here, and we have Alabama and OSU play, and Oregon and FSU play, that is, bam, that is perfect, because obviously biggest question, is who plays Alabama, who gets this number 2 seed in the BCS standings. And we're going to try and break that down here. Let's just start by saying Ohio State, people have been saying Oregon and FSU, they're the ones battling for number 2. They're the ones who keep getting flip-flopped in the standings. They're the ones who, have been back and forth all year long. Ohio State's kind of taking the back seat. But can we really count Ohio State out if they're undefeated? I mean, who cares, if their schedule isn't as great? How are we to judge how good of a football team they are if all of these teams are undefeated? I think that's the hardest part, is just based on conference and strength of schedule, saying who goes. I mean, there has to be a head-to-head battle between these 3 teams. There has to be some kind of, way to have them, like if only there's a way to have them play to figure out who goes. Because, either way, if an undefeated team isn't going to the BCS National Championship, that's just a shame. That's too bad. Ohio State, 2 undefeated seasons, potentially, in a row, and no championship to say for it. That's absurd. But it's just how it goes, at this point, I'm not disagreeing with the standings. I should move these 2 because FSU just overtook Oregon in the latest BCS rankings. I definitely agree that FSU has shown a lot more than Ohio State has. I think Oregon has shown that it is more than Ohio State does. But really, Oregon and at Florida State, how are we supposed to figure out which team is better without them playing each other? And I think that's the nightmare scenario is even if 3 teams go undefeated, let's say Ohio State slips up against Michigan State if they play in the Big Ten championship game. Let's say Michigan State's number 1 ranked defense, number 1 rushing defense and number 1 passing efficiency. Let's say they stumble to that defense and they drop out. So, where's my eraser? Well, whatever. Ohio State's gone. Let's say, these teams are left. Let's say Oregon and Florida State are the, both undefeated at the end of the year along with Alabama. Still, that is the toughest decision. Who goes, who doesn't. If Oregon goes undefeated, I believe they should be in the national championship. I believe that there is a case like Alabama. If they go undefeated, they should not be left out of the national championship. They play in the Pac. The Pac has gotten better. Stanford on their schedule, Oregon State, Washington, UCLA, all ranked teams, all quality teams. But then again, Florida State, blowing out Clemson, blowing out Miami 41-14. Both of them were top 10 teams. How do you say no to FSU? How can you send them to the Sugar Bowl? How can you not put them in the national championship? And I think, as much as I love Oregon and I love Florida State, one team needs to lose a game because if these 2 teams are undefeated, I think that someone is getting left out of, getting to play on the big stage in Pasadena. And I think that both teams deserve to do that, to play in that stage against Alabama. And so it's just going to be a shame if both teams win out. And, I feel bad for the team that doesn't get in. I can't really tell who it's going to be at this point. I think that is the worst case scenario. That is a terrible way for the BCS to go out, in their final year, have such a overloaded, undefeated stack of teams that all, none of them get to go to the championship, except for obviously the 2. I just think that's too bad. So, worst case scenario right there. Because who are we to decide which of these conferences is, better? Big 12, I guess I should count in that because we can't really count Baylor out yet. But strength of schedule, conference-wise, who gets to go? I mean, Ohio State's been blowing out Big Ten opponents. Why can't they go? Oregon has been blowing out Pac opponents. Florida State has been blowing out ACC opponents. Why? How are we to decide which team is, done better? And we can't. And it's just, you got to see them play head-to-head. If only Florida State and Ohio State could play head-to-head. If only Oregon and FSU could play head-to-head, then we could figure out who plays Bama. Next year, I hope we get 4 undefeated teams again, because then we're going to have the college football playoff. Next question. Let me go get my eraser real quick. I think that's good enough. All right, question number 2 is, which undefeated team is the biggest challenge to Alabama? To Bama. So obviously we got which undefeated team biggest challenge, and on undefeated I'm gonna go with I'm gonna say Oregon is under that, FSU is under that, OSU, and Baylor. I'm going to go with those 4 teams. Fresno State, NIU, obviously undefeated. They're not going to go to the national championship game if these 4 teams are undefeated. They have a long, very slim shot of that even happening. So let's start this off. Biggest challenge to Bama. Sorry, Baylor fans, but I think that just as a prerequisite, you guys are gone. I personally think that these 3 undefeated teams are, better than Baylor. That's just my opinion, but that's what I believe. From here, first of all, this is a tough question because, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this requires me to say which of these 3 teams is the best. Then I have to say, can they match up against Bama, and how would they do against Bama? It's not just one team. How would they do against Bama? Can they win? Biggest challenge to Bama. I'm gonna have to say, what does each team have for them? Obviously, Oregon speed, turnover D, Mariota, and I think that's what's gonna be the best. Its biggest challenge to Bama is gonna be a Manziel-like quarterback. He's been the one who's challenged Bama both times he's played. gotta have a running, but at the same time, very accurate quarterback. And I think that is going to be the first thing that Oregon and FSU have over Bama is Jameis Winston and Mariota. I like Miller, but I don't like his passing ability as much as jeez, that is such a bad. I'm such a bad writer. I don't like Miller as much as I like Winston and Mariota. FSU, strength. I think they're the strongest, just power team out of these three. I think they can match power for power with Bama. Maybe not, they can slow down, maybe not stop Alabama's physical rushing attack, but they can play with it. They can, fight dirty, run the ball. Alabama, obviously their defense is just locked down, but they can do something, I think. They have playmakers, and, that's what you got to have against Alabama. You've got to be able to find the end zone and make big plays. Obviously, Oregon has that speed in the playmakers, but, they don't have enough power. I think that's Oregon's main problem is weak line, if that makes sense. They're not going to win the battle in the trenches against Bama's powerful defense and offensive lines, respectively, probably top 5 in the country at each. OSU, I'm just, all they really have that, really gets me thinking they can take Bama is Carlos Hyde is really their only challenge I think they can throw at Alabama is Carlos Hyde's power and speed running back. I think, maybe we just need to see OSU play MSU, and I think that could really, decide how they would do against the Crimson Tide because the Spartans had potentially a better defense than Bama. So if Ohio State can drop 40 on the Spartans, then maybe they could take the Crimson Tide, but we don't know that yet. In this, I would say that Ohio State is just gone because I think FSU and Oregon have, just a little more than they do. But, you never know. Braxton, and I think Ohio State is a very dynamic team. They can win a lot. They can lose a lot. Braxton Miller, you never know what he's going to do. He could be a huge playmaker. But it's got to come down to these two teams. And I just don't know about Oregon. They might be a little, they might have the speed to get around Bama. But the problem is, Bama, they're known for their strength and their power, but their defense is fast, too. You've got to have a fast defense, and I think their defense is fast enough to hang with Oregon. Therefore, I think FSU is the biggest challenge to Alabama. Just the way they handled Clemson and Miami, I think they are the biggest challenge. Even though I say, as a Ducks fan, I would want Oregon to go to the championship. I think they could easily hang with Alabama. I think FSU is the biggest challenge to Alabama. And I'm going to stop that here because we're already over the 10-minute mark. Thanks for watching First Take Tuesday, guys, and see you next week with another episode.